Welcome to the video about microphone placement. So this video is the follow-up video of my explanations to the different types of microphones, and here I basically just guide you through mainly how can you do put microphones on the drums, and I will also explain you how you can use microphones for electric guitars or bass amps. So yeah, I just go through the different drum parts now and explain you what microphones you can use there. So for the bass drum, I mostly use a Shure Beta 91, and just be aware here that these microphone types I mentioned here is not the only types you can use. That's just the types I have been using for my setups normally, but of course there is plenty of other microphones you can also use for the exact same drum part. So I just give you a little bit of information about how I have done it in the past, and also be aware of that the type of microphone, like there is these very expensive microphones you can buy, and of course they produce nice sound, but also always be aware of that basically the difference between a cheaper mic and a more expensive mic is almost always very a small difference. So make sure you can somehow pick up the drum, and if you can afford it, buy a little bit of a more expensive microphone so you can even raise the level of the sound a bit more. But of course, much more important is always first, how does the drum sound? What is the quality of the different parts of the drums? And of course, what is type of mixing console do you use? Can it actually even handle this like high quality mics or not? So you should always consider all of these things a little bit, and I would not recommend to just buy the most expensive mics just so you have it, because I think there's much more other points where you can start to improve your sound. However, if you can do it, of course, it's cool to have the good mics. All right, so let's start with the bass drum. For the bass drum, I have been using Shure Beta 91 so far. So this is a microphone with a cardioid polar pattern. It's a border, how is it called, like PZL, pressure zone microphone. I put it into the bass drum on the floor of the bass drum. It's a condenser mic, and this is normally the microphone I use mainly to pick up the attack of the bass drum. So this microphone helps me to get the front part of the drum head, and I then use a second microphone to pick up the lower frequencies of the bass drum. So I normally use two microphones. The second one I use is the Shure Beta 52A. So that's the one you can see here. It is super cardioid polar pattern, and it is a dynamic microphone. And this microphone I normally put right into the hole or onto the hole. If there is no hole, I just put it outside, and this is how I normally pick the lower frequencies. So that really lows this bass drum lows like 40 to around 100 hertz, and that's how I then pick. How I basically use these two microphones, and then I try to mix them I adjust the levels so that the mix of the attack and the low frequencies makes a good drum sound basically. Yeah, right, I said that already. There is the attack is at the drum head. This is why we use the inner microphone for picking up the attack, and lower parts are in the middle of the drum or outside, so that's why we use the outside mic to pick the lows. Then the snare. For the snare I normally or most often use the Shure SM57. It's also cardioid polar pattern, it's dynamic. You can also use MD421 from Sennheiser. This is also good. Maybe one important thing to know here is that the gap between the mic and the drum head is really crucial to how it sounds, and also the angle from the microphone to the drum head and how far it reaches into the drum head. This is all important and changes how it picks up the sound, what the color of the sound is. So probably you can try to remember two things. First, the angle. So if you have a very steep angle, so if it's pointing down very steep to the drum head, you will get a very hard, very hard and thin snare sound. If you put it much more flat, probably more like this or even flatter, you get a much softer, much fluffier kind of sound from the snare. Also, if you put it more into the middle, the sound becomes much thinner and harder and more and stronger. And if you take it more to the outside or even to the border of the snare, the sound becomes weaker and not that defined anymore, let's say. So there is normally we use two microphones to pick up the snare. The one we basically have here, the snare top mic, and then I also normally take another SM57 to pick up the snare from the bottom. And that's, in my opinion, quite crucial, because at the snare bottom we have the chain of the snare, and the chain basically makes up this snarey sound. So that's what we also want to hear in our mix. So I normally do another mic just from downside at the border, basically of the snare, just pointing directly to the chain to pick up this chain sound. One important thing here, always check the phase. Maybe you have to do phase invert. I'll explain phase invert later again, I guess, or I explained it in a video before already, actually. So probably do phase invert for the snare bottom mic, because it could be that you have counter phase signals because of the two mics picking up the same drum. So you want to get rid of this counter phase signal. So yeah, be aware of that. Then next, hi-hat. Hi-hat is I normally use, or I was before using, the Bayer Dynamics M21 TG. It's a hypercardioid dynamic microphone type. Of course, condenser mics for hi-hats, as also mentioned in the last video, would definitely make sense here. So I really love the Bayer Dynamic M21. It really did a good job for me, but also always consider there is pretty good condenser mics for hi-hats on the market too, which could pick up the sound probably even more brilliant and more accurately. Here, be aware, there is a lot of audio bleed in all the drums. Anywhere there is always a lot of audio bleed, so make sure you don't pick a mic which is taking up the sound from the sides too much. So there will be coming in a lot from the snare from the side, but also from the cymbals on the top. So I would rather recommend you to take probably hypercardioid or supercardioid here to get at least or not too much sound from the sides, but a lot of sound from the bottom. And yeah, we just have to live with the cymbal sound, which is then also coming in from the top a little bit. Then next, toms. For toms, I always recommend using clipped mics, so that I like these little clips here. You can just clip them onto the toms. I've always been using Sennheiser E904. They did a pretty good job for me. It's cardioid type of microphone, and it's dynamic microphones as well. The same as with the snare here. The angle of the mic changes how it sounds. The color of the sound is changed by when you change the angle, and the same effect here. When you put it more steep, you get more attack a thinner sound, and if you put it flatter, the sound becomes softer. So just try different angles and look what sound suits the best for the sound you want to achieve. Next, overhead. For overhead, I would also recommend to use condenser mics. Be aware here, the overheads, they're not only used to pick up the cymbals. The overheads, of course, they pick up the cymbals, but they also pick up the whole drum. So you always want to use microphones which are able to not only pick up cymbals, but the whole drum. You will also, when you do the mix, when you do a proper mix, you will always also take some snare, some toms, probably hi-hat into the sound of, into the mix of the overheads. So Yeah, also the placement of the overhead is pretty important. But first, I have been using the Neumann KMD184. A pretty good mic in my opinion. It's cardioid, and the good thing about it is that I've explained that before. Normally when you sing or when sound is coming into the mic from the side, you get like a change in sound a little bit. The color of the sound changes a little bit. However, in this mic that's not the case. They made sure that if sound is coming in off axis, that there is no color change in sound. And last but not least, it's also a condenser mic, which I mentioned here already. I would recommend using condenser mics for overhead. Just make sure you don't put it too close to the cymbals, because there could be a comb filter effect then. And what I always try to do is that I take the two overhead mics and I try to place them at a position where they both have the exactly same distance to the center of the snare. So for me, the snare is the center of the drum, and I try to make sure the distance from the center of the snare to the two overhead mics is the exactly same. This is also I would heavily recommend to do it that way, because yeah, as I mentioned already, we want to pick the whole drum. We want to create a stereo image basically of the whole drum, and that's why we should make sure that the overheads are placed so that they pick everything almost equal, which makes sense because the snare is in the center, so they should be like the same distance from the center. All right, so that was it for the drum. I hope that helped you. Yeah, just also Google what microphones you can use. Always think about what budget do you have. You can easily spend lots of hundreds or even thousands of dollars just to buy drum mics. So yeah, always think about what level are you at, what level is the band at, how good is the drum, and what can I afford. Then I quickly talk about how to pick up electric guitars or bass amps also. So for these types of guitars, if the guitar player is using an amp, I normally take SM57s also to pick up the sound coming out of the amp. So here also the angle and the position is pretty important. And be aware that even if you just move the mic a little, it can already change the color of the sound. So just try different positions and look which position is best for your application. So if you put the mic, I also normally take a little flashlight and try to see where the membrane of the amp is. It's normally not in the middle, but more a little bit on the side. So I take a flashlight to find the center of the membrane, and then I know where to place the mic. So if you place it in the very center of the membrane of the amp, the sound will be very thin, very high, very defined. But if you place it more on the side of the membrane, it will become more muddy, more undefined, more soft. So I think you want something in between. Normally you don't want neither to put it into the middle and definitely not completely on the side. So what you want to do is probably first start at the middle and then go a little bit more to the side to find where the best position is for the type of sound you're looking for. And also always very important, most electric guitar players I was working with, they normally not always check what settings they took on the amplifier. So check the level of the amplifier, probably also check the EQ on the amplifier so that you get the best sound possible here. And of course the same thing almost always applies for the bass guitar amps too. So yeah, that's basically a part about how to use mics. Of course we use mics also for vocals, but that's then a different story basically. What I always, probably just one or two words about vocal mics. There's plenty of good mics you can use. One thing I often see doing vocals wrong, especially unexperienced vocalists, that they take the mic down here when they sing, but then we already get this off-axis changes in sound, especially as we almost always use cardioid polar patterns. So make sure you always tell the vocals to hold the mic like that they sing on axis into the mic, that they hold it such in a way that they sing straight into the mic. So that's what I always tell the vocals, so that we get the best sound out of their voice. So that's it. Thank you for watching the video.